knew that what she did was wrong when she did it?
I'm not sure that either me or the investigators would know what was in her mind at the time. All I can account for is she entered a plea this morning that she did that would be under Rule 11, a complete admission of guilt with respect to the allegations, and the allegations indicated that to be the fact.
Does she have marital privilege still, even though she's still technically married to Marc? I don't think their divorce would have finalized so quickly.
Yeah, the marital privilege would apply to communications that occur between spouse. That may be her privilege that she could herself waive if she was subpoenaed in any proceeding.
Does the plea agreement obligate her to give that up at any point?
The plea agreement does require her to testify truthfully in any matters that either the Ethics Commission investigators or a subsequent grand jury or a trial would contemplate. So she would have an obligation under one of the paragraphs in the plea agreement, which is standard in any matter where a defendant enters into a plea. When there's an ongoing investigation, it requires essentially a debriefing and cooperation both with information and or documents.
So if she were asked certain questions concerning her estranged husband, she'd be compelled to answer them?
Pursuant to the plea agreement, she'd be required to do that, yes.
Or she could just go to 10 days in jail, right?
That I wouldn't want to address.
Is Marc Dann ultimately the target here, though? Is that who you're trying to get to?
I wouldn't want to identify any specific individual as a target. I think the Ethics Commission, and prior to that, as you know, the Inspector General has conducted an investigation into certain activities, and certainly the guilty pleas entered here in the last month or two by Mr. James, Ms. Lenhoff, Mr. Gutierrez, and Ed Simmons would all had similar plea agreements, all required cooperation.
Why was these cases heard here in Franklin County? Gutierrez involved his business back in Youngstown. Ms. Lenhoff's allegations involved her time at YSU, still there. Why have these in Franklin County instead of in Mahoning County?
The Ethics Commission and I believe the Inspector General made multiple referrals that included both this office as well as I think Paul Gaines and Dennis Watkins in Mahoning and Trumbull County. And in terms of venue or jurisdiction, we would only address the cases that were handled here, and at least with respect to the condo situation with Mr. Gutierrez and Mr. Jennings that was here in Franklin County, and the other conduct of Mr. Gutierrez, at least that he entered his pleas to, related to filing documents here in Franklin County related to his business workers' comp, I think, reports, and alleged misuse of state property. So I think all the things that we handled were properly venued here in Franklin County. I think there may have been some other issues that were looked at that didn't include conduct in this county, and those were things we didn't look at.
So it's conceivable there could be other issues in other counties yet that had no real direct connection to Franklin County.
Well, I think the only thing I would say is I think there were things that we didn't have jurisdiction over here in Franklin County, therefore we didn't address them.
Mr. O'Brien, I think the report will reference an attempt, or it does reference an attempt to secure federal funds. That issue, as best you can tell us, does that expose anybody else, including Marc Dann, to the potential of felony crimes?
I wouldn't want to comment on Mr. Dann himself, and I think it's fair to say the investigators are not done with their investigation, and they are continuing, even this morning, to, pursuant to that plea agreement, do further interviewing of Mrs. Dann. And so I think at this time they will continue to conduct their investigation, and if they feel there's any information they should resubmit to us, I assume they will do that.
At this point in the investigation of the entire Marc Dann administration, do you think that there's any felonies likely down the road?
As you know, Mr. Gutierrez did plead guilty to some felonies.
Okay. Any more?
And I'm not sure I'm able to say whether there are felonies or misdemeanors that will be down the road with regard to any person.
In this case, the allegations go back more than 2 years for attempts to secure the grants. You would think that would be outside of the statute of limitations if it's a 2-year statute for misdemeanors. How are you able to bring a charge in this case if the facts in this situation go back more than 2 years?
That's a good question. There is an exception to the general statute of limitations for government employees, and that is because they're in a position perhaps to avoid the information becoming public as long as they remain a public employee. The statute of limitations provides that it does not start to begin until you leave public employment. And at least in Ms. Lenhoff's case, she continues to be an employee of Youngstown State, and therefore there was no statute of limitations problem regarding her charge that the court heard this morning. Otherwise, there would have been a misdemeanor statute of limitations problem.
If someone else in her department at YSU or someone else at YSU would have applied for this grant and, you know, really made no other communications with that office other than just applying, would that have been okay as far as?
I think Mr. Freel is probably better positioned to comment on this than I, and I suspect he may even have done that, but I think he, in his commission focuses on the ability to improperly influence the parties that are involved in their status as potential improper influences or efforts to influence, and I think had someone else from Youngstown State made a similar application and she was totally and completely uninvolved, then it may well have been okay.
Mr. O'Brien, with regard to misdemeanors, is there anything else that would cause the statute to toll for Dan?
There's a checklist of items in the statute of limitations. They don't all immediately come to mind, but I think, as I have indicated to most of you who have inquired, we would consider the May 14th date as the end line for any misdemeanor offenses that may relate to Mr. Dan. At least, certainly, that would be a deadline for any misdemeanors. I'm not suggesting they're there or not there. I just am saying that is a deadline that would apply.
Is there any chance that there could be any federal charges or anything like that? Or would it all be state level if anything else comes forward?
I can't comment on what the federal authorities know or don't know. All I can, I think, probably say is I've had no contact with any federal officials in connection with an interest in the matters that have been ongoing here at the state level.
So, Ron, what do you have on Marc Dann and when are you going to do it?
Well, as I said, won't comment on anything as it relates to either Mr. Dan or anyone else. As you all know, in this investigation and others similar, the Millie investigation, if and when charges are filed, we'll notify folks of that, and if and when there's further matters in this, would follow the same procedure.
Are you satisfied with the plea that she entered and then the punishment she ultimately received?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it accounted for what the conduct was, and I think so.